So I talk a lot about the idea of an efficient student. And when I say the word efficient student, sometimes it's a little bit unclear what that really means. And I've had comments about that in the past. People have asked me, how do you actually measure efficiency and what does it actually look like? An efficient student is really a student that's able to cover everything that they need to cover in a shorter amount of time. Weirdly, a lot of students have this belief that if you get better at studying, you're studying more. Like the better student studies more, but doesn't it actually make more sense for the better student to study less and get the same result, or study the same amount and get even better results? What I wanted to do was make a very quick video breaking down how you can think about efficiency and actually build towards efficiency. Because ever since I released that video about encoding and the issues with spaced retrieval, I've had lots of comments from people saying that, well, don't you need spaced retrieval? And you're gonna forget things anyway, and does this encoding thing even work? And why isn't it more common? And all these different basically ideas around why it seems like it doesn't really work to increase your efficiency. But here's the thing, is that efficiency follows this pattern. And I want to explain that by using this graph here. When we think about the overall outcome that we're trying to achieve, so let's say that this outcome is a particular grade, like getting an A+, or maybe you're a professional and your outcome is learning in a way that allows you to be really good at your work. Whatever it is, in order to achieve this outcome, there are basically two different phases of learning that need to take place. And I've talked about this plenty of times before. It's encoding versus retrieval. We need to encode information, which is like filling the bucket, and then we need to retrieve it, which is like taking water out of the bucket. And if your bucket has holes in it, then you're not going to have anything to retrieve. The more holes and the bigger the holes, the faster you're going to be losing everything out of it. And it doesn't matter how often or how fast you fill it. If the holes are there, it's just a matter of time. And so refilling this bucket constantly, as you can imagine, is very repetitive, very time consuming, and pretty demotivating. What we do with good encoding technique is we fill the holes in this bucket so that when we fill it with information and knowledge, it will stay there, or at least it won't be leaking out like absolute crazy. But information will always be forgotten in some form. And one of the most common forms is called retrieval failure. And it means information that was encoded in the long-term memory, which will be forgotten if we do not practice retrieval on it enough times. And how well it was encoded will affect how fast that knowledge is lost. So if we have knowledge that was encoded not very well, then our need for retrieval is very, very high. When our encoding is low, that means that we need a lot of retrieval to avoid retrieval failure. So maybe we need to be doing some form of retrieval practice like flashcards or any other retrieval practice. Maybe we need to do that every single day and we may still forget something. When our encoding is a little bit better, then we don't need to retrieve it quite as often. It's not saying we don't need retrieval at all. It just means we don't need to be retrieving it quite so frequently, and maybe not so extensively either. Because our encoding is better, our brain is holding on to that knowledge a little bit more. So this trend really continues, so that as our encoding gets better and better and better, our need for retrieval reduces. So we need less and less retrieval. So when our encoding is really, really good, we will still need to do retrieval, but we just need less of it. It doesn't have to be as frequent. We can get away with doing a retrieval practice once every 2 to 4 weeks, and that retrieval practice may not be very time consuming. Like we could be able to do retrieval practice for an entire month's worth of material in just like 3 or 4 hours. And that is realistic and it's achievable, and it's the very thing that I teach and my students are able to pull off. But there is a time that it takes. So one of the common things I see with some of the people that are going through my course is that they expect that as soon as they learn an encoding technique, they will suddenly not need to retrieve at all anymore. But it doesn't work that way. As our encoding is building, our retrieval needs drop, but until we get to a certain level of encoding, we will still need to have a high enough amount of retrieval, which is why one of the first things that we teach in the course is actually how to do really high quality spaced retrieval practice. I just wanted to make this video to clear up some of these confusions about how encoding techniques work, because I'm getting the impression that some people think encoding techniques are this black and white magic bullet that just suddenly solves all of their studying related problems. But in reality, it's very sort of, I guess, realistic and logical to think that your knowledge and your ability to learn something is affected by your ability to retain it and then what you're doing to maintain it and use and utilize it. And you do need to have both parts of it. And if you're severely deficient in one aspect, like encoding, which most people are because it's just not trained, it's not how the education system was created, all of these other issues, it's just not common, and it's just more difficult to do proper encoding, then you're going to need lots and lots and lots of retrieval. That's a lot of flashcards, a lot of time spent going through hundreds or thousands of flashcards every week, a lot of time spent relearning or rewriting or rereading notes. And then after your exam, you just still forget it again. And that's because fundamentally we're limited by the encoding. And then as we get better and better, it ends up being replaced. So that's why I'm a very big proponent of training up our encoding skills. But I'm not saying you can just abandon spaced retrieval. You really can't ever abandon spaced retrieval. It takes a long time to get to a point where your encoded knowledge is so firmly implanted in your head that you will never forget it without spaced retrieval. That doesn't really happen. Maybe if you've been learning something for like 15 years, you'd remember it for the next 30 without retrieving it again, but probably give it enough time and you will still forget. So in practice, what this means is that an efficient student has more encoding and therefore needs less retrieval because of the fact that spaced retrieval is naturally repetitive. It takes time, it's multiple iterations. If your encoding is higher, you need less retrieval and you can do it in bulk. So that is what creates efficiency. It means that you can spend one weekend studying the next 2 to 4 weeks worth of material, and then you can spend a couple hours here and there doing some spaced retrieval maybe once a fortnight or something, or even less than that, and you're able to actually keep on top of all of the work. So it allows us to study in batch and retrieve and revise in batch. This is not normally possible for students without a high level of encoding, because the time it takes to study 2 to 4 weeks of material is either really, really long, it would just take like the whole 2 to 4 weeks, or if they are able to do it very, very quickly, they're not able to hold on to that knowledge for long enough for it to be meaningful. So they might spend that weekend pre-studying everything, but by the end of 2 to 4 weeks later, they've already forgotten 50 to 70% of it, which means that 50 to 70% of the time that they spent on pre-studying it went to waste. So you sort of might as well have not done it in the first place. And it's also, as I keep mentioning, very demotivating and frustrating if you're forgetting that much. And everything that you've studied, you probably then need to retrieve it every single, day or every couple of days, because there's just overwhelming amounts of information being rapidly forgotten. In real practice, those numbers are probably conservative. In reality, I see students that are using poor encoding techniques pre-studying, let's say, an entire term's worth of material in 1 or 2 weeks, and they honestly forget like 90% of everything that they learned after the first 2 weeks of term starting. In which case, that was a huge waste of time. And you could have spent that time doing any number of things, including just relaxing and having an enjoyable life instead. The important point here is that we increase our encoding to give us the ability to study a large amount of volume and actually hold on to it in a meaningful way. And then we maintain that with retrieval. And that is what creates efficiency, because we can work in bulk. And it's not really possible to do that unless our encoding is at a certain level, and that to train is a pretty deliberate process and it takes time. This is the reason why it's so rare to see people doing this, because most people are not willing to invest the time and the effort that it takes to train this up properly. Even the students that I have joining the course, that like literally they're paying money to join my course to learn these, and they're still trying to master these techniques in like 2 or 3 weeks, when in reality it takes 2 to 6 months to get good enough for it to be making that serious dent in your overall efficiency. This is just a really realistic view of how encoding and retrieval actually work. It's a fairly straightforward relationship. It's pretty obvious, but I've noticed in our Discord community, I've noticed in the comments on my YouTube videos that there is this misunderstanding encoding seems to be this magical, mythical thing, but it's not. It's just the other side of the same coin. And when we train it, just like training anything else, we need to make up for the weaknesses until it gets to a certain level where it's good enough. If you were wondering about that, I hope you learned something new. I hope this clarified things a little bit more and brought it into more perspective. And if you didn't learn anything new, then I'm very surprised that you're listening to the video for this long. Then I guess you must have liked at least something, maybe my CPR dummy with the sunglasses. Anyway, thanks for listening. If you stuck through this far, I'd appreciate if you give the video a like. Obviously, as you know, helps with the algorithm and gets my video out to more people. If you like the content, consider leaving a subscribe. I'd appreciate it, and I'll catch you in the next one.